In at number 10, we have the Spino. And this is a creature which I think is an extremely underrated one. And it often gets forgotten about in most lists of some great Ark Carnivores. And I know this isn't a great Ark Carnivores list. This is the best late game island tames. Doesn't also mean that they have to be tamed in the late game. I am slightly twisting the definitions around a bit. But there's only really one creature which kind of falls into that slot, because it's technically really a mid-game creature. But there are so many creatures you can include on this list, but the Spino, in my opinion, had to be one of them. It is extremely mobile, obviously spawns on the island, that is a requirement for it to be on the best late game, the island tames. They do have to spawn on the map, and the fact with its mobility that allows it to spin 360 degrees on the spot, like, the Rex couldn't do that. Like, nothing could make the Rex do that. And also, they're really great in the water as well, and they have the hydration buff. And someone said recently that I accidentally said the Spinos had the bleed ability. If I ever said that, I am sorry, I didn't mean it. They do not have the bleed ability, but Rexes don't have the bleed ability either, so, you know. And actually, overall, these things do a little bit more damage than Rexes. And back in the day, like 2016, 2015 Ark, they were seen as more powerful than Rexes. Like, this one was just a bigger, more powerful carnivore, whereas the Rexes kind of taken all of the scene nowadays, and these things are pretty much forgotten about. And they can even go on their hind legs too. That was part of the TLC update that they had at some point, allowing them to deal even more damage. And they're really great carnivores, so I simply had to include them on this list. And I really hope that you agree with me on this one. Next up, we've got the Giga, and since this is an extinction, I can't put these things so high on the list, as for the islands you simply don't need this kind of creature, but I have to put it on here. Come on, the best late games of the island in terms of tames, the Giga, the Tiny Tim, has to be on here. It's an absolute beast, packing loads of damage, but the reason why I say you don't need it is it isn't allowed into boss fights on the island. The Rex is pretty much as powerful as you can get, really, for boss creatures on the island. And I know that's a really, really huge generalization, but, you know, we'll just go along with it. Either way, the Giga can't be allowed into boss fights, so it has no boss use. If this was extinction, however, I'll put these things so high on the list. Like, man, they are so useful on that map. But they are still useful for gathering resources on the island, like hide and meat and all of that. And they're just really fun to ride on, to be honest. That's another great benefit. They are huge. The only real downsides being their terrible stamina and their rage meter, so it kind of gives them a percentage of their own health, so they don't technically have their true amount of health. Still, I had to include it on the list. Come on, it is the Giga. Next up, following the huge carnivore trend, we have the Karkinos, and this is kind of here for a similar reason. It's a big carnivore that deals a hell of a lot of damage, and it spawns where the Giga would spawn, and it's essentially just the Giga, but a little bit better in my eyes, so that's why it's slightly better on the list. It comes in at the number 8 spot instead of the number 9 spot, but the overall premise of the creature is pretty much the same. Again, big carnivore, deals loads of damage, it does all the same stuff. Yes, it has a blood rage, which allows it to do more damage than the Giga when full, and it doesn't have a rage meter, so it has its full health rather than the percentage of its health. And on top of that, its stamina isn't the most atrocious thing you've ever seen. They are pretty much the same thing, and I'm demonstrating its stamina leveling here, which isn't awful, but don't do that. Don't put all your levels into stamina on this thing. That is not what you want to be doing with this creature. Honestly, don't go near the stamina stat. Just leave it as it is. It is alright. It is fine. It is so much better than the Gigas. But if you really need it, get a stamina mutation. And although I would advise you tame one of these things on Ragnarok, they can still be tamed on the island. I do have a taming guide video if you want to check that out. If I remember, there'll be a card at the top of the video. If not, there'll be nothing. Right, in at number 7, we have got the Rhyniognatha, and I had to put this thing here. Come on, this thing can literally pick up Rexes. It does have to be warranted as one of the best late game the island creatures. And what a late game creature this is. Honestly, it's absurd, like its tame method and all of that. It only spawns on the islands under Lost Island, actually. And in normal, I'm still going to call it normal Ark, really, because ASA hasn't normalized itself in the Ark community. It's pretty much half and half, I think, at the moment, if the numbers are to be right, because ASA frankly is too expensive, and on most things it doesn't run very well. On the consoles though, if you do get ASA on a console, you'll be fine with it. It will be a perfect experience for that console and it will work. But on PC, I'm literally buying a 3090, which at the time of me recording this video is a £650 used card, let alone its price new, just to play a dinosaur game. But thanks to you guys, all of you watching these videos out there, I've actually been able to afford a card like that for my own personal rig. Currently, I still have the 2060 Super in it, but soon, in about should be maybe 2 weeks from now, I'll have a 3090 in this thing, and then going on later in the year, I'm going to go for a 3950X and get some more RAM, because 16 gigs isn't really enough anymore, especially for ASA. It does actually recommend 32 gigs of the stuff. Also, if you noticed here, I've been, with the B-roll, I should have said, sorry, cancel my last point there, I've got technology stuff in my mind. Either way, the B-roll there has been showing you how to tame one, which is from my video of how to tame one. Again, if I remember, I will leave a card. If not, there won't be a card there, and you just have to look up Rhyniognatha. But the same method for the Rhyniognatha is pretty much an exact copy of the Reaper taming method, so if you know that, then you'll be fine. But there's just a couple of extra steps, but it's not too complicated, but definitely is a late game tame because you're gonna need a lot of resources for it, especially if you want 100% effectiveness. Next up, we've got the Therizinosaur, and this creature is one of those tames where I just, like, I don't feel right if I have not tamed this thing on the island, and it's so essential for any kind of boss fights. I had to put it on this list. It has to be here, okay? This is the Therizinosaur. It gives that buff to all of your creatures with the courage roar in the boss fight, and paired with a Daedon, it really does work. Although I found the Daedon isn't the most essential nowadays, and actually I have done quite a few things without the Daedon. I've just paid more attention and put my health into my Rexes or whatever boss creature I'm using. I admit a Daedon is helpful, so that is why I'm giving it a small mention here, although it is not making this list of the best late game Ark tames. And actually, towards the late game, it does become a lot more boss orientated, and you'll see that with the next 4 or so creatures. But actually, the creature in at number 1 is not boss orientated at all, and I wonder if you can guess it. If you do guess it before the number 1 slot, then put a time pin down from when you actually guessed what that creature is. Right, now at number 5 is the Baryonyx. Almost couldn't say 5 there. And luckily, now we have got all my personal life out of the way and all my tech life out of the way. We can now focus more on the dinosaurs, as I'm sure you don't need a full lecture right now on my life story. Either way, the Baryonyx is a pretty easy tame for it to be making this list, and it is the second easiest, I would say, on the list. The creature in at number 1, I'm going to give you another clue there, it is the easiest tame. The second easiest tame is at number 1. It's a very simple knockout tame, spawns in the swamp biome. I think you can find it in some other places as well. Definitely can, not just in the swamp biome, but if you really want to guarantee finding one, just head there. Make sure to avoid swamp fever. Either way, they're the best caving creature on the island, which is why I put them in this list. And they have a right click spin attack which can stun creatures up to the size of a Megalodon, which makes them pretty useful for underwater caves as well. And I know you can use Sharkos and Basilos and all of that, but for me the Barry does everything, and that is why I use it. Apart from the artifacts of the Skylord, that cave is far too tiny for pretty much any creature to fit in, unless you have a dung beetle for caving for some reason. Next up, we've got the Megatherium, and this is here for the chitin gathering, but mainly because of its insanity against the Broodmother boss fight on the island, and obviously that is why it has made the list, and that is why it is here. It is the best creature on the island for defeating the Broodmother, as it sort of gets a rage buff, you could kind of call it. Not in the case of what the Giga has, or it's very similar to the Karkinos' Blood Rage, although doesn't really involve blood, and a sort of alpha buff glow to it, and essentially once it's killed an insect, it will deal absurd damage to just everything, and I think there's a 500-second time or something like that. But considering the broodmother constantly spawns spider minions at you, pretty stupid of it, I know, they will constantly replenish that buff. So that buff will always be active, and in the presence of a UT buffing them even further, you can have yourself a pretty insane army against insects, as I think it gives them damage, and then obviously some damage reduction on top of that as well. And again, you're going to get a lot of chitin from that broodmother boss fight. So I guess if you want loads of chitin instead of going to the insect cave, just do the gamma broodmother a lot, or you can do the alpha broodmother or the beta one. It doesn't really matter. Any broodmother stage will work perfectly with this thing. No issues at all. They are the go-to for the broodmother, which is obviously why I've had to put them on this list. And in a second you'll see what that buff looks like, and you know, maybe you can see what I mean by it looks alpha buff like. In at number 3 we have the Theri, and this creature had to be in here firstly because its saddle is unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
I know, that is a very nice one. Obviously makes this thing the perfect Ark creature. There is nothing better than it. But the reason for this creature being on the list is firstly its gathering abilities. This thing is insane at gathering all things fiber, wood, thatch, meat, hide, and you can't gather rocks, so I won't bother talking about those. And in my opinion, it's kind of more useful than you say an Anki and a Dodic, but I will give them a small mention here for gathering. They're not on this list, by the way. But the creature unit number 1 is extremely useful with a creature like the Anki and the Dodic. Have you got it yet? Have you not? Either way, the other use for this creature is that it is the best creature on the island for the dragon boss fight. The only downside being it's a herbivore, so for it to heal quickly, you will need sweet vegetable cake. This is where I would say a Daeton is very necessary to make sure these things stay alive during the boss fight, as then they can actually heal up quite quickly and effectively, because they don't have the ease of meat. A sweet vegetable cake is particularly expensive, and you probably can't get thousands and thousands of it, just like you would get thousands and thousands of meat. But the reason why they're so good at the dragon boss fight is the dragon has a particular buff, or debuff, for carnivores with its inflamed fire buff, whereas this thing's a herbivore, so it doesn't get that. In at number 2 we have the Rex, and I had to include this thing on the list. I'm not going to put it in at the number 1. By now you probably should be able to tell what is in the number 1 spot. Again, comment down that time code once you figured out what the number 1 creature is. But either way, this creature, the Rex obviously, is the go-to creature for any kind of boss fight. Yes, it does have a slight debuff in the dragon boss fight, and it doesn't have the buff the Megatherium has in the broodmother boss fight. It still works for all of them, although I would mainly use it for the Megapithecus because that's the only other one. But actually, nowadays, I kind of tend to use Spinos more for that boss fight because they tend to not fall into the absolute death hole that's there in the arena, which is pretty annoying. But, you know, you can get around it easily with Rexes. It just, they tend to get stuck a little bit more, which is why I don't really like them for that. But there is no denying they are a really great boss creature, and with how easy they are to tame on ASA, it just has to be in at the number 2 spot. And it doesn't. I can't even speak anymore. Either way, it doesn't deserve any less, in my opinion, or any more. But before we get into the number 1 spots, just a quick honorable mentions. The Aloe is a pretty good boss creature. The Megalosaurus does definitely pack a punch as well. Creatures like the Sarco are pretty great water tames, although maybe not in the late game. You could still say they do definitely pack a punch. The Basilo is a great option for underwater caving in the late stages of the game, and a creature like a Thyla is always very nice to hand. But let's get into the tame in at number 1. In at number 1 we have the Argentavis. Have you guessed it now, by the way? 1433 should be the latest that you've guessed what this creature is. Either way, this, in my opinion, is the best Ark late game tame for the island. It is just such a useful flyer for travelling from A to B. With Cryopod you can travel with any creatures which you want, and it's always my go-to flyer. And if flyer speed leveling was still a thing, then maybe I would go for a Quetz, but they are so slow, and also I still prefer the Argy in a lot of ways. Although it can't pick up as much as a Quetzal, it is faster than the Quetzal, and it has weight reduction on many resources like metal, crystal, and obsidian, making it a go-to for all of that metal farming. And metal is an essential resource in Ark Ready. To actually complete it, you'll want at least some flat gear, and you'll probably want a pump action shotgun, and obviously metal tools so you can make your gathering process as efficient as possible. And when paired with an Anki and a Dodic, you have yourself an even better creature. And they are so easy to tame. They're suddenly being unlocked at level 68. Yes, just one off the perfect level. At least I'm pretty sure it's 68. It's either 68 or 62. It is somewhere in the 60 range, but before level 69, obviously. But yes, in my opinion, the RG is the best. Its saddle also acts as a portable smithy, and it has a really nice regen buff too. You really can't live on the island without an RG in my opinion. In at number 10, we have got the Karkinos, and the reason why I've put this creature here, as personally, I really do find it fun to just go and ride around on one of these things, and then obviously you can just absolutely decimate tons and tons of creatures across the map. It really does just make for a very fun experience with a creature like this. If you can absolutely dominate the space across a map and just like kill everything in your sight, there is something inherently fun about that. The Giga kind of does do the same, but I find its mobility does lack quite a lot, and that kind of stops the fun compared to this creature, whereas you can just go for ages with this thing and you don't really run out of stamina, and the damage just keeps getting higher until that blood rage is full. So there's just a lot of element of fun just with you essentially feeling like you're on top of the world, like you're the strongest creature out there when you're on this thing. Obviously you're not, but still there's just so much fun in even taming these things, and also just for general use as well after you've obviously tame them. The tame process, I find, if it glitches, it can be very infuriating, but if it actually does go smoothly, it's quite a fun and enjoyable one, especially if you got a few friends along the way. And sometimes if it bugs and you got a few friends along the way, it still does provide for fun experiences. You can just laugh about how the game is failing a lot, and you know, Ark players do like to do that a lot. But yep, that's why I say the Karkinos is a very fun tame. Next up, we've got the Managama, and this creature is here as you can absolutely zoom across the map with this thing, and also just as a general mount just for traveling around on, they are really successful in the fun department. I find these creatures are just insane to zoom around with. Their mobility really does make them very fun creatures, and although their tame method doesn't really have anything to do with the funness scale, we'll call it for the purpose of this video, I find as long as it does go smoothly, it can be a reasonably enjoyable one to do, because it's not just the standard knockout tame. There is some sense of variety within it, which, you know, it makes these things slightly more interesting, you could say, to get around, which I think does hugely benefit these creatures on this list. And obviously the main reason why they're here is because of that insane speed. Having these creatures travel at such a rate really does make them insanely fun for me. And you know, as a player that doesn't usually tend to just go around with creatures like this, whenever I do hop on one, it really is sort of a breath of fresh air in a way, because I always love coming back to these creatures and using them. I really should use them even more, but they have been obviously nerfed since release. They're not quite as good as they used to be, but it's still nice to have that speed and agility. It really does add a huge element of fun to these things. Next up, we have got the Argentavis, and this creature is here because, like, come on, it's got such an insane speed. And I promise not all the creatures on this list are just simply here because of an insane amount of speed, because, you know, although fast creatures are definitely really fun, maybe the funnest creature out there on the funness scale is not necessarily the fastest one. But for the case of the Argentavis, and also I'm going to say the Rhyniognatha, it really does help significantly that they are fast. They would be less fun if they weren't, especially considering all the agility that they can do, and they can do it at such a speed. It's so fun and also just enjoyable to do. You really do love these creatures just for all of their insane mobility skills, and that's kind of what makes them really fun. The same goes for the Rhyniognatha, and also with their immense amount of weaponry on top of it as well. It adds even more on top of it. They're just so packed with useful, nice abilities, and they're just well designed, very mobile creatures that really do go quite a long way for giving you a better playing experience. It really does have something to be said that these are some fun creatures. And yes, I'm putting 2 in at this spot because I was being a bit indecisive, but mainly the Argentavis, but obviously the Rhyniognatha does fit into a very similar category of creature, so I decided to put it here as well. Next up, in at number 7, we have got the Rhyniognatha, and this creature is simply here because, like, come on, who doesn't love to ride around on this giant insect thing? And although it's a little bit too OP for my liking, it definitely is a hugely enjoyable creature to ride around on and use generally across any map. Obviously they only spawn on the island and Lost Island in the swamp areas, but still you can transfer them to other maps and they're useful in a lot of other scenarios. Obviously they're great for just doing general PvP raiding, but they're just great as general travel mounts as well. They can pick up tons of creatures too, so if you want to get to some bosses fast, instead of herding all your Rexes up to the volcano, you can always use a Rhyniognatha. If that's something that you want to do, you can obviously just use cryos and stuff like that as well, but you know, if you want to do it that way, you can. Also, if you just want to take some creatures across the map, or if you don't have access to the cryos at the moment, you can always just take a creature back with it, although you probably would at the time that you tame this thing, unless you've been gifted one by like a server admin or something like that. Rare scenarios, but you know, maybe sometimes it would happen. Their tame method is pretty much the same as the Reaper, it's just been ripped off of it. Obviously it doesn't really count as a rip-off because it's made by the same people, but still, you know, I felt they could have been a little bit more inventive with the tame method, but it definitely still is an enjoyable one because I really do like the tame method of the Reaper, and you know, it's a very nice one to do. I don't really like the fact that now you need to use loads of materials instead of gathering XP. I prefer the Reaper's tame method in that regard, but apart from that, really fun and enjoyable tame method. I know you don't really factor that in usually, but I find the tame method is quite fun as well. It really does make me want to tame the creature more, and then once I've tamed it, if it's still fun, it really does just elevate it on this list, I'm just going to say, and it definitely really does deserve to be up here. It can demolish tons of creatures, it's fast, it can pick up tons of things, and it's such a great flyer for all kinds of things, and for that it really does deserve to be on this list because it can't be demoted for its insane amount of skill and power, and also just the amount of thought and design that's gone into this creature from wildcard. It really does just make it an even better one and nicer one to use. And obviously, sadly, you're going to lose yourself a creature, but I think it's all worth it to get yourself a Rhyniognatha. Next up, we have got ourselves the Therizinosaur, and this creature is here because I really love shooting those spines out of this creature. I find that is just such a useful and effective ability. Like, I know it's not really the most complicated thing out there, but I really just do enjoy this creature's simplicity in a way. It makes it so much more enjoyable to me. Very easy tame, and obviously you can get those Argentavis on Gen 2 as well. Like, honestly, great creatures to tame. If you haven't already and you have access to them, please go tame yourself a Rhyniognatha. You'll not regret it. Just for general use, they're insane. You can even take them into bosses if you want to. I'm pretty sure they can go into boss fights. If not, that might just be because I have some sort of mod installed. Obviously, maybe not the best boss creature out there, but still, I do find it fun from time to time to go out on one of these creatures and do some bosses with them, but mainly for just general travel around the map, I find them to be extremely effective, and obviously that's what I use them for the most, and I really do enjoy them for that. They're truly fun creatures, especially that spine attack that I was talking about there. It adds so much depth and character to these creatures. Even though they're so simple, they're so basic in their simplicity that it makes them really fun because they're so simple. You instantly know what to do with these creatures. There's no faffing around with things. It is just boom, there you go, done. It really does make these creatures so effective in this department. In at number 5, we've got ourselves the Gigantopithecus, and I kind of feel like I have to put this creature here. I know it's still a really new one, but I've been really just enjoying it. It's a very mobile creature, and yeah, obviously you can throw eggs out to tame it as well, but I found just trapping it works just fine, and for me that makes the tame method a lot more fun because I don't really just go into all the process of getting those eggs, and the mini game is definitely a very nice one to have, and I like how inventive underrated that tame method is, as it's something we've never seen before. I do expect them to be a little bit larger, but obviously that doesn't really matter. But you really feel like you can do pretty much anything with these creatures. Yeah, maybe they don't deal the most damage out in the world, they still can deal a hefty amount, and you can pretty much destroy everything on the map with these things. And obviously you can carry babies with them like you could on a Maywing. And you know, there's so much use out of these creatures, and I know they're only new, but still you can get tons of great use out of these things. Next up we have got the Bloodstalker, and I really do love these things for just general travel and underwater exploration. As just me as a person, I've always really liked the thought of an ocean, and just oceans and games always make me just generally quite excited. That's why I really liked playing through Subnautica and Raft and all of those games. They really are some of my favourites out there, and the fact that I can use the Bloodstalker to do some insane underwater exploration in Ark, it really does make it a hugely fun creature for me. And also just generally you can just basically pretend to be Spider-Man going around the map, and obviously you do kind of get an awesome spyglass sort of effect as well. As you can see, all the aggressive creatures just generally makes them really useful, because not everyone does have access to awesome spyglass out there, so you do essentially once you have one of these creatures. And the tame method is pretty inventive as well, especially considering they did it first. You can obviously just feed them some moss chops prior to when you actually feed them the blood bags, which is obviously in your inventory in yourself, to get yourself 100 effectiveness. It's really not that much of a challenge whatsoever. And obviously on Gen 1 you can just get some hexagons anyway, and then from that you can obviously get you can get hexagons with the Bloodstalker from the Bloodstalker race missions. That's what I meant to say. It went a bit off track of thought there. Either way, insanely great just general travel mounts, and obviously great for underwater exploration, which is the main reason why I'm putting them here. Kind of a little bit undervalued relating to my last video. That'll be at the end of this video if you do want to go watch that to do with the Bloodstalker, because I find people don't use it for that enough, and it really is great for that. And obviously you can also just grapple creatures in and kind of suck the life out of them too, and if you have blood bags on you, it can heal itself quite quickly as well. So it's useful and versatile and fun in so many ways. In at number 3 we have got the Desmodus, and this creature is here just because, like, come on, it's the Desmodus. It is this like Nordic bat. Obviously I know it's not really Nordic in a sense, but it comes from a very Nordic map, which is why I'm obviously calling it that, although obviously it was much before the Nordic period when this thing actually did exist, if it did exist. Not to this scale though. I'm pretty sure it was actually an existing thing though. And this creature is just insanely great for PvP, and although I don't use it, I don't actually play Ark a lot in PvP, is what I meant to say. Whenever I do, it's really fun to just pick players off mounts with these things. Really useful ability. Also that gliding ability, general speed, makes them really nice. Just as a general fast traveling mount, it really does just make these creatures even more fun to me. And obviously with Sanguine Elixir, taming creatures becomes an absolute breeze, and you know, that makes these things even more fun for me to use. It's just pretty much in endless versatility with things that you can do with these creatures, and I really do love them for that, and I get so much fun out of many uses with this creature. Next up we have got the Reaper, and obviously I had to put this creature here. Come on, look at this thing. Like, this is that ultimate Ark creature capable of just so much stuff in the fun department. Its tame method is insane to get through. Like, I love taming these things. Again, I did say it with the Rhyniognatha, but I find it is an even better taming method than that. And also, I find they're just more fun creatures to use. They fit into the map so much better than something like the Rhyniognatha, and I felt like more thought and design was been put into them. And although, yes, maybe people would prefer to have that other tail ability, which does still torpor to creatures, which the Reaper Queen does, instead of just the one that slows down enemy creatures. That's the only one real downside I can think of the Reaper. They still are so fun to ride around on, as you just feel like you can decimate everything in the map. They can just deal tons of damage, and they're pretty agile in the mobility aspect too. They can even bury themselves underground. There's like pretty much endless uses for these creatures, and I really do love them for that. There's so much you can do with a Reaper, especially if you tame a good one and you put all the effort in it. There's like no better feeling than really getting to that stage and getting that successful Reaper tame. It really does it always works out for you mentally. You really do feel so proud of yourself when you tame one of these things, and it is a hugely fun experience once you've done it right. And finally, in at number 1 we have got ourselves the Deinonychus, and I feel like this creature really does have to be here. as it deserves to be on this list, as it's so versatile in so many ways. Such a great fun boss creature. Once you've got a big pack of these things, there is no better feeling than driving these things straight into tons of creatures which are really difficult to kill and absolutely decimating them with tons of blood flying everywhere because of obviously that bleed ability, just grappling into creatures and ripping them to shreds. It really is just hugely satisfying, and no other creature really gives me the same kick as these creatures do. I know loads of people get the same kind of kick as something like a Shadowmane, but I vastly prefer the Rhyniognatha. The tame method, although not the most inventive, is actually just a pretty nice one. I like how it's just the Wyvern's tame method but a little bit modified. It's a lot easier than taming a Wyvern as well, especially if you're taming Wyverns on Scorched Earth, and obviously then you can just assemble a huge pack of these things and decimate loads of things across the map. They also do have insane amounts of speed as well, again making these creatures even more fun, because with more speed it is better on obviously that funness scale. These things also don't take full damage, so there's no kind of loss of immersion in a sense of where you can just kind of do what you want and you're just so immersed in this creature that you have no care in the world for what's about to come up next. And obviously they can park up walls as well. Nothing really can stand in your way in terms of terrain, obviously, unless it's just lava, but no creature really can go through that unless you're obviously on a Magmasaur, but that creature's not on this list because, you know, in my opinion, that's still a good creature, but it does not compare to the Rhyniognatha, which is in at the #1 spot. And give it up for our patrons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, Dominic Maciejewski, sorry about that name, and everyone else that's on this list. All the people I've mentioned are paid members, and if you feel like that's something you want a shout out at the end of the video, go join the Patreon or become a paid YouTube member.